Welcome back to the Investigator discussion series. I'm rather Incoherent, and this is Agnes Baker. I think Agnes is a very strong character, however, I really don't see eye to eye with the community on Agnes, at least it feels that way to me. So I'm going to start by going through everything except her ability, which I think I basically see eye to eye with the community on, and then talk about her ability. First of all, 5-head Mystic with 3 in foot, best possible stat line for a Mystic. We're never going to see a 5-head 4-foot Mystic, I hope. So you really can't do better than this. It's 5 and the only proactive stat that matters for you, your head, and then 3 in your Mythos stat despite already having that much of an optimal stat line. This 2 in book and 2 in fist is not a problem in any capacity. Mostly it's just going to give you the ability to add those stats onto certain events. It's not important at all, unless you're playing one of the rare campaigns where the Mythos phase might test those specific attributes. She has a 6-8 split for soak, which is great, and her star is a +1 for each horror on her, which is basically blank. If you had a worse Mythos stats, the +1 or more would probably be relevant, because this will start off at +2. You're gonna pass any test where you get a star, but generally speaking, unless your Mythos stats are bad, you're expecting that anyway, so basically a blank star. Coming down to deck building, deck size 30, Mystic 0-5, Survivor 0-2, Neutral 0-5. That's just a really good pool of cards. As I showed in Jacqueline, there are just a lot of Mystic cards that you can put into a deck. You have no problem throwing out a 30-card deck with only Mystic cards. And if you have a good secondary card pool, you can do a lot of work with that. Survivor is, in my opinion, one of the best secondary card pools for any class, and easily the best for Mystic, because it gives you access to a lot of methods of boosting your head, a lot of methods of healing, a lot of methods of mitigating failure, just generally useful things that combo into a Mystic deck really effectively. So I think her stat line's insane. I think her deck building is some of the best deck building in the game, but her ability is something I have an issue with. Reaction: after 1 or more horrors placed on Agnes Baker, deal 1 damage to an enemy at your location, limit once per phase. The power of this ability is pretty much dictated entirely by how freely you are able to deal yourself horror damage, and then what benefit you get from that horror damage, right? If the only way you trigger Agnes's ability is by taking horror damage from a Mythos card while an enemy is already at your location, you're not going to get a lot of value out of this ability. Where I disagree is I think the cards that let you use this ability for meaningful benefits basically aren't good enough to justify warping your deck around them, and her ability largely is just much worse beat cop. Because while you could just say this is beat cop, that's not really accurate. Beat cop gives you the soak that he burns through. This is like beat cop that dealt direct damage to you and had no soak of his own. Additionally, since this requires the horror to go onto Agnes directly, you can't place it on things you control, so it's not going to combo with stuff like Pete Sylvester. That's the obvious thing that comes to mind. But additionally, there's just a limit to how much you can possibly take. For most characters, it's going to be 5, unless you run healing. And there is healing. There's stuff like Deny 5, there is a variety of cards you get access to from Survivor, the most notable one being by far Earthly Serenity, although that's technically a cross-class card, so it doesn't matter. Key of Solomon these days is definitely one of the best ways to heal yourself, but that requires you being a blessed team, although I will say that Mystics, of all the Mystics that you can put into a blessed team, Agnes makes the most sense, getting access to Ancient Covenant as well. But generally speaking, because you either have to run healing and the lightning bolt cards that are going to give you good triggers to take horror voluntarily whenever you want, it just takes a lot of deck slots for something that's really not that worth warping your whole deck around. It's not that deal 1 damage essentially as a lightning bolt, because that's what the kind of triggers we're talking about are going to be, is a bad effect. It's that there are just a few too many hoops to get a lot of it. Jumping ahead a little bit here, I do want to talk about the triggers for Agnes's effect before we cover anything else, even her signatures, because it's so important to evaluating that ability. The 2 best cards by far for triggering her are Painkillers and Forbidden Knowledge. Painkillers is a 1-cost neutral slotless asset with 3 supplies on it, and as a lightning bolt, you spend 1 supply, exhaust Painkillers, and take 1 horror to heal 1 damage. So if you're running this, you're basically impervious to health damage because, you know, if you heal for 6, you're going to be fine, and it gives you the lightning bolt triggers that you want to use your ability. If you have something like a Pete Sylvester to take horror damage that's not like intentional damage you're taking, because sure, you can't put horror on Pete to trigger your ability, but you can have Pete so that you're never afraid of running out of horror because of all the extra horror you're doing yourself. He's still very good. In addition to giving you +1/1 to your most important stats, right? So Painkillers isn't terrible. It's not great, but it is a fine way of triggering it. It's just not on its own good enough. I'm never happy to put Painkillers in the deck, even in Agnes. I also see people talk about Forbidden Knowledge a lot. 0-cost slotless talent asset, uses 4 secrets, discard it when it's out. Lightning Bolt, exhaust Forbidden Knowledge and take 1 horror, move 1 secret from it to your resource pool as a resource. And as 4 resources and 4 damage, that's pretty good, but at the cost of 4 horror, that's pretty bad. I've gone on at length about how it's important to me that economy is freely, immediately usable. Using Forbidden Knowledge as Agnes when there is not an enemy next to me feels terrible. Using Forbidden Knowledge when there is no need for the resource feels terrible. It's so finicky in my experience. Like, I've playtested Agnes in a standalone game before, not a standalone campaign, in a Night of the Zealot campaign. Because I felt so shitty, because I look at these cards and they feel so bad to me. But when I play with them, I don't know if it's just like how I approach the game or what, but I just feel terrible running these cards. These feel like this is a minor amount of healing and a minor amount of damage in exchange for a slot in my deck, and that is so valuable. This feels like the jankiest economy card in the game, but it costs nothing to trigger my ability, and it gives me a little bit more economy, even though it's unpredictable economy in terms of exactly how I get its value. If Pete's in play, then using it when I don't need the damage is a little bit more tolerable. But they both feel like these are the best you've got. These are both core set cards, I think. No, Painkillers is from Miskatonic Museum, but Forbidden Knowledge is core set. And it very much feels like the game has been designed with Agnes in mind. There really have not been a ton of new Lightning Bolt take horror voluntarily effects. So my issue with Agnes's ability isn't that it's bad, the ways of triggering it are bad. It's that the quality of the triggers for this effect basically have not improved for the entire lifespan of the game. And at this point, the opportunity cost of putting stuff like Painkillers and Forbidden Knowledge in my deck feels so incredibly high. As I said, I can easily make a 40 card Agnes deck for any role and struggle to find cuts. Fitting the stuff in that makes use of this ability is really difficult for Agnes. And while I'm not gonna say it's bad, I might be coming off that way because I'm so cynical about the cards, it's because I want them to be good. It's very frustrating for me. And instead I feel like I'm just jumping through some hoops to build a more unique Agnes deck that's about on power level with like a completely milquetoast bland, nothing interesting Agnes deck. Getting into her signature, she has the 3-cost accessory slot Heirloom of Hyperborea, commits for Head Fist ? And as a reaction, after you play a spell card, draw 1 card. I mean, I wanna like this. I love card draw, but Mystic Economy can struggle a little bit. Cards like Scroll of Prophecies are partly difficult to run because they are 3-cost draw cards, but it also needs to be emphasized that another reason Scroll of Prophecies is so hard to put into a deck is if you're drawing more cards, you have to pay for more cards. So this requires a lot more economy to reliably make use of, and I end up not really valuing this a ton, especially when you come over to her signature weakness, which is a 2-cost event that you will have to pay for at some point. So, you know, if I'm spending all of my money to play this, only to draw into something I have to play immediately, that's a problem. When I say play immediately, what I mean is this is Ancient Evils that you have to pay for. And in most circumstances, you can avoid it for a little while sometimes, but in most circumstances, you will want to pay for it immediately. Because forced, if it is in your hand at the end of your turn, reveal it and take 2 horror. Which is, you know, brutal. Ancient Evils is bad, Ancient Evil that dealt you 4 horror over the past 2 turns is worse. And while there are absolutely games where you end up not drawing this or not needing to play it, in a lot of circumstances, Agnes needs to carry a lot of weight because her signature is Ancient Evils that cost her an action, and that puts her at a tempo deficit compared to many other characters. It's worth noting that in a lot of scenarios, the Doom Clock is not tight enough for this to matter. This can matter tremendously in something like an Essex County Express, where the Doom Clock, in terms of each individual agenda, is tremendously important, but in most scenarios, the Doom Clock is not so tight that you're going to be losing the campaign or winning the campaign based on 1 Doom from Dark Memory. Agnes, however, has a parallel, which means she has advanced signatures. Her advanced Heirloom commits for Head Fist ? which is incredibly good, and now it has 3/3 soak. Importantly, only damage and or horror from player card effects can be assigned to Heirloom of Hyperborea. So this is for absorbing parallel Agnes's ability, which we'll get to in a second, and the backfire effects from all of your spell cards. And while 3-cost draw engines are difficult to pay for, Parallel Agnes is notably better at running this because her ability is a self-damaging economy ability. Having a built-in economy ability on Parallel Agnes, this is going to be much easier to pay for all the cards you're drawing off of Heirloom of Hyperborea. And the 3/3 soak is just generally valuable and quite possibly worth it, even without the better economy. However, you basically need the better economy because it comes with the advanced Dark Memory, which costs 2 more resources. Parallel Agnes can take a damage to lower this back to the original cost of 2, but it's still going to hurt. I think Vanilla Agnes has a really hard time putting this in their deck because 4 resources is just so prohibitively expensive without economy ability, And let's go talk about that economy ability, about Parallel Agnes. She has different soak than original Agnes. She is split 8-6 instead of 6-8, and this is because her ability is, as an additional cost to play a spell event, you may take 1 damage. If you do, reduce the cost to play that event by 2, so just guaranteed economy, and you may, this is optional, shuffle that event back into your deck instead of discarding it. For most events, you're going to want to shuffle it back into your deck, but in some circumstances, say you're near the bottom of your deck with 2 wards in hand, you might not want to redraw a warded protection. Or, if you're using it to make your weakness cheaper, you really don't want to redraw that. So this is a really strong ability. It is unique spell event recursion, it is good economy, it incentivizes you to play a more event-centric mystic like a few other characters can, and it's just generally powerful. My issue with it has always been that until recent expansions, I haven't seen enough spell events and enough incentive and enough freely available soak to make this ability go to the moon. However, as of recent expansions, there are some pretty notable cards that make Parallel Agnes a lot better than she used to be. Her star effect is also no longer blank, you may heal 1 damage. I don't quite know why it's a may, I'm not sure in what circumstance you wouldn't want to heal 1 damage, but if you didn't want that, you can avoid it. Coming back to Vanilla Agnes, I do think this ability is good, I just don't think the triggering methods for it are good enough compared to what else you can put in your decks these days. Having talked at length about that, even though this ability has the potential to be very good, I find that the Parallel Front is a much stronger card, although it does incentivize you to build your deck very differently from a traditional Mystic. Coming down to her deck building, she has deck size 25 like Parallel Skids, Mystic 0-5, Spell 0-3, Occult 0-3, and a Neutral 0-5. That Occult 0-3 gives her access to a pretty wide variety of cards that are all fairly strange and not really a consistent theme. The most notable for Agnes, or Parallel Agnes specifically, would be Occult Lexicon and Hallowed Mirror, but also Segment of Onyx with Mystic methods of recharging it is on the list, although I find the idea of drawing every piece of Segment of Onyx, especially if I'm shuffling cards back into my deck, to be pretty difficult. And having talked about the original Agnes's card pool, I really cannot overstate just how strong I think Survivor 0-2 is. So when it comes to Agnes, I'm not super committed. Agnes is one of those characters where I need to play multiple campaigns with her and get a feel for her more than I currently have. Because my current understanding is not good enough, my table doesn't play enough Agnes, and I have to go off watching other people's Agnes campaigns and looking at Agnes decks. So take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt, but in my opinion, I think Parallel Agnes Front, Vanilla Agnes Back is the way to go. It gives you the more useful ability and the better deck building. Before I get into that deck, I do want to show off a couple of other things. First, I want to show off a just pure Kluver Agnes. Kluver is a role that doesn't have anything to do with her ability. I'm completely giving up any method of intentionally triggering this ability in Kluver Agnes. The reason I want to show you this deck is to show you the opportunity cost of her ability, just how strong the cards competing for deck slots are. You have Unrelenting for better draw than Mystic has access to, Lucky for general Mythos mitigation and draw, at a Crossroads, just transparently one of the best draw cards in the game, an additional copy of Warded Protection that will likely have no cost. Pete Sylvester is just some of the best soak in the game, giving +1 to the only stats we care about, and Sparrow Mask in this character basically makes you Mythos immune. With both Pete and Sparrow Mask, you're looking at an 8-6 Mythos phase. Additionally, it's going to happen that you take damage or horror, and that you're able to use this on any test you're remotely concerned with pretty consistently. And while this is what I think like the best top-end cards in terms of general value to cram into an Agnes deck are from Survivor, there's tons of great Survivor cards that don't make it here. Just off the top of my head, Live and Learn is very powerful in a Mystic. Rite of Seeking can end your turn without doing anything. Live and Learn doesn't care if it's your turn. You normally never play it outside your turn, why would you use Live and Learn on a Mythos test? But you can Live and Learn a failed Rite of Seeking test and try again with nearly guaranteed success with how high these numbers are. We're looking at base 9, nothing in play, just Rite of Seeking 4 and a Live and Learn. That's base 9, you're going to pass short of autofail. There are so many good cards in Survivor that trying to cut stuff from decks like this to fit in, I'm gonna call it bad beat cop triggers, because that's really how I feel about it. Bad beat cop triggers, trying to cut things from this deck to fit in Painkillers and Forbidden Knowledge is agony. If my team did need me to contribute damage and did not want a pure Kluver, I would be looking at Painkillers and Forbidden Knowledge to some degree, but I'd also be looking at stuff like Spectral Razor 2 and All of McBride, just putting in some amount of damaging assets. It's not clear to me in any way that if I'm playing Kluver or Flex, the most efficient ways to do my job are to run these bad beat cop cards. And I'm calling them bad beat cop because yes, the proactive part, the 1 damage is better, but beat cop gives me 2 horror soak and 3 uses of its ability that costs me nothing. whereas these cards are directly dealing damage to a finite health pool. The fact that Painkillers is not giving me +1 head, the fact that Forbidden Knowledge is not giving me the Horror Soak to take the horror on. These are important parts of why these cards are worse than Beat Cop. And at the start of the game with smaller card pools, they're very, very good. But when they're competing with At a Crossroads and Unrelenting, it's so damn hard to fit them in the deck. I'm also going to mention, not super refined here, but if I'm playing on a Bless team, I'm always looking at Bless Agnes as a thing I can play. The Key of Solomon on any Mystic makes them a natural fit for a Bless team. You don't have to put the Blesses in yourself. You can be one of the people that helps to capitalize on Blesses, provided your team's not already tapped out on that role. And if that's the case, Key of Solomon is some of the best healing in the game by far. Additionally, being a Mystic with access to Ancient Covenant sort of puts her in a spot where Agnes tends to benefit from being on a Bless team more than other Mystics. I like Bless Agnes, it's a pet deck for me. Every time my team wants to play a Bless team, they're like, hey, don't play Bless Agnes, go play Bless Calvin, go play Bless X. They want to play a Bless character that's more interesting than just like, you know, Key of Solomon and Ancient Covenant are fucking compelling reasons, but not actually the most interesting Bless character. Coming over to the final Agnes deck we talked about today, Parallel Front, Vanilla back. This is how I view Agnes as her strongest self. And let's cover some really notable cards with this ability first, because as an additional cost to play a spell event, you may take 1 damage. That means that you care a lot more about damage healing, damage soak, or even the much more obscure damage transfer mechanics. And then because it reduced the cost to play those events by 2, it's also massively reducing the economy demands. So first of all, a card like Bandages is a lot better in Parallel Agnes. Now you can look at this as essentially gain 4 resources as opposed to heal 3 for 2. Sparrow Mask is obviously insane when you are self-damaging yourself nearly every turn. You have basically unlimited uses of Sparrow Mask. Normally I say that Sparrow Mask is basically unlimited and makes you insane to the mythos just in general, but on a Mystic with this ability, you can use Sparrow Mask for your proactive test all the time in addition to the mythos phase. It's not a resource you really need to meter out anymore, it's just going non-stop. Your stats are very nearly 7-5 when you have this in play. And when I say 7-5, it's because these 2 in the middle don't exist to me, they can't hurt me. With Bandages and Sparrow Mask, Backpack becomes very good. Additionally, with Advanced Heirloom Hyperborea, it's a great target for the Backpack, get your draw engine going. Arcane Initiate's great in a Parallel Agnes deck. It's generally a good card in any Mystic deck once you've tilted yourself to like 1/3 plus spells. But because Parallel Agnes specifically will be shuffling, that's Vanilla Agnes, because Parallel Agnes specifically will be shuffling spells back in her deck every time she plays them, almost every time, not necessarily all the time, it's going to result in having a super high density of spells in your deck at the end of a scenario where Arcane Initiate's basically guaranteed to hit good shit every time it goes off after like turn 8. Deny Existence 5 is normally a bells and whistle card, and a Parallel Agnes, this is just tremendous. You convert an autofail Grasping Hands into fuel, you convert an autofail Rotting Remains from oh god I'm nearly dead into I'm completely fine. This is just invaluable, especially with the ability to duplicate it, meaning that rather than being like probably invincible, you will be definitely invincible. Drain Essence and Hemlock is one of the cards alongside Sparrow Mask and Bandages that really served to elevate Parallel Agnes in the last 2 expansions. It's a card I had completely overlooked the interaction here with Parallel Agnes, but it is, when you play it on Parallel Agnes, a 0 cost event that deals 2 damage and heals you for 1, which is crazy. To read the card properly for those more unfamiliar with it like I was until recently, 2 cost event, spell, parlay, choose an enemy at your location and test head X, where X is the chosen enemy's fight value. If you succeed, move 1 damage from your investigator to the chosen enemy, up to 2 damage instead if the chosen enemy is non-elite. So this allows you to effectively heal yourself throughout the scenario by dealing with 2 health enemies or more. Hey, quick rules question that I don't actually know the answer to that I realized while I was editing this. Can you transfer more damage than the enemy has health? Like if I get a rat, can I drain essence it and transfer 2 damage to its 1 hit point? Because like obviously you can hit it for 2 with a machete and it dies, but mechanically I don't know if it took 1 or 2 damage. I'm inclined to think I can transfer 2 damage even if it only has 1 health, but I don't know the rules on this. Because it's a parlay, you can freely use it on your teammates' enemies with no risk of hurting them. And yeah, it's just incredibly good and smooth in Parallel Agnes. We of course have Read the Signs and Spectral Razor. These are upgraded in this deck list, but since the upgrade just gives you a way to recur them, you really don't care about it that much. You'll likely be using your event anyway, or your ability rather, to pay for these events as you recur them. So Like really, them being upgraded means you can send them directly back to your hand if you get a symbol. It's incredibly minor. It's not nothing, but it is incredibly minor. And the rest of the deck really is largely just generic Mystic shit. I'm choosing to go with just Rite of Seeking to help on the clue finding front. I have 4 events to help with fighting, and as a flex, relying on purely read the signs is not quite enough. So Rite of Seeking, in my opinion, is the best Mystic clue finding asset. Somebody asked in a comment recently about this, so I'll say it in a video here. The reason I prefer Rite of Seeking to Clairvoyance is because if Rite of Seeking fails repeatedly, then I'm going to lose tempo. If Clairvoyance fails repeatedly, it might kill me. That's not a great argument. This is like slippery slope talking about the worst case scenario, but it is part of my decision making because I talk so much about raising the floor. Losing a lot of speed can hurt. However, the floor for how much speed you lose is actually a lot lower than it seems. Rite of Seeking doesn't just end your turn, it loses the amount of actions you had left. In my experience, while you can't always do it, you will lose actions to Rite of Seeking in a campaign, guaranteed. In many circumstances, you can engineer your turns in a way where you play an asset, then move, then investigate with Rite of Seeking. You would do it in the other way. You would move to see what's in the location, and then you would play the asset, then you would Rite of Seeking. But the point is that in very many circumstances, you can make your plays in a way where you will never lose a full turn to Rite of Seeking. A lot of the time, getting a symbol in Rite of Seeking just doesn't do anything. It was your last action. And sometimes you lose one action, and that's unfortunate. But very rarely are you in a situation where you have to Rite of Seeking first. No matter when you use Clairvoyance, it's going to have the same 2 horror penalty, right? So in my eyes, I'm able to mitigate the downside of Rite of Seeking in a way where I cannot mitigate the downside of any other card. And I view it as an inevitability that at some point, my arcane asset's going to spend all 3 charges dealing its effect to me. So taking 6 horror compared to losing like 1.5 to 2 actions, it's not even close, right? I just view Rite of Seeking as something where pilot decision making can mitigate the failure state of this card tremendously, and I cannot do that with other Mystic cards. Now, one notable thing about this deck, it's only 51 experience. That's because I'm not running Arcane Research or In the Thick of It. In the Thick of It and characters that convert their health values into resources is a lot worse. Mark Harrigan and Mystics are pretty much the only characters that are looking at In the Thick of It and being like, oh, I don't know about that. But Parallel Agnes, even though I'm not running Arcane Research, I still would not take In the Thick of It. And the reason for that is because you only have 6 Horror Soak, and your health is value. So I don't want to use either of those resources. As for not taking Arcane Research, it's entirely because if you take 2 mental trauma with a 6 in mental soak, that's going to put you at starting 4. Any chip horror means you are dead to Rotting Remains autofail. And yes, later on you can have an Arcane Initiate in play and be safe to that, but that is not guaranteed. I am greedy as hell for experience. However, I'm also poignantly aware of just how vulnerable a Parallel Agnes with limited Horror Soak can be to horror damage, and how much value I can lose by taking In the Thick of It out of my health. The counterpoint, I suppose, is, and this is a very valid counterpoint, Drain Essence is a lot better if you start off with health damage, isn't it? Yeah, I think this is a thing where sitting down and thinking about it for the video, I've slowly come to the conclusion, right in time for the final recording, that I need In the Thick of It because of Drain Essence. Which leads smoothly into, what do you do with In the Thick of It? What is your starter deck? What's the upgrade path? This entire deck is upgraded level 0 cards, so the starter deck is unsurprisingly the same deck. In terms of In the Thick of It, I mean, Backpack level 0 is a card I despise, Backpack level 2 is a card that I love. So I'm using 2 of my experience to get Backpack level 2, and if you go to the final deck, there really are no 1 experience cards, very few 3 experience cards. I do not have At a Crossroads in this deck. Man, we're just live discovering all the problems with this deck, huh? Alright, who's dead to me? I'm looking at my plan to upgrade to Nigh 5 and just being like, you coward. You could have so much experience, take all of the trauma, get Arcane Research right now. I think Guts is the worst card in the deck. With unlimited Sparrow Mask and a base 5 and head, the Guts really is for my teammates more than me. I'm already running Promise of Power pretty much for that reason. I don't think Guts is going to be better than At a Crossroads. Both of them are really just draw cards, and I think Guts is the weaker of the 2. Although they're both very good. So the question is, at level 0, coming down to this deck where I'm now just using Down the Rabbit Hole for At a Crossroads for maximum experience efficiency, or sorry, In the Thick of It for At a Crossroads because of Down the Rabbit Hole. I don't want to pay the extra experience down the line. In this deck, am I safe to run Arcane Research and come in with a grand total of 4 Horror Soak? Heirloom's not going to protect me from anything. I have no self-inflicted horror to speak of. This is just Health Soak and draw. Holy Rosary is 2 Sanity Soak. Arcane Initiate is 2 Sanity Soak. Is that enough? Deny as well. Just keep that in your hand, try at all costs to never play it unless it's on a horror test. I did say something to the effect I'm a greedy lunatic when it comes to experience, right? I do think you can run Arcane Research in this. I think at level 0 you are safe. Coming in with 4 Horror Soak is obviously very scary. That's still not enough to die instantly. You're running Holy Rosaries and Arcane Initiates with a relatively high draw deck compared to almost everyone else. Characters like Mark expect to go through a scenario and survive. Admittedly, characters like Mark also expect to like draw their whole deck and use 3 copies of Soothing Melody for whatever is needed. Characters like Tony expect to have infinite Sanity Soak through other means. But like 5 Sanity Soak does not just kill a character. There are ways to counterplay it. I think Holy Rosary, Arcane Initiate, and in particular Deny Existence are enough for me to feel comfortable playing with Arcane Research, which makes this 49 experience go from like actually not that unreasonable with the new experience permanent and down the rabbit hole to completely trivial to obtain. This is the full 14 plus 14 plus 7 from Arcane Research down the rabbit hole, and the Great Work coming up in Drowned City. So 7 times 5, 45 additional experience over the course of a campaign. So this deck is a foregone conclusion by the end, and you'll probably be pretty close to it by the middle. Obviously, everything you're buying with the list I've given, other than Relic Hunter, is a direct upgrade. I would probably say, Relic Hunter is in the deck, 44 bonus experience. I would actually say Relic Hunter is a fairly high priority upgrade, because you do want Heirloom of Hyperborea in play, you soak 2 damage on it, and then it just sits there as a draw engine forever, whereas Holy Rosary isn't going to be usable as Sanity Soak if you do that, so I would say in scenario 1, don't be too attached to playing an Heirloom of Hyperborea, don't worry about it, get some value, let it die, get Rosary and play for soak, but get Relic Hunter relatively quickly. I would want to spend 4 experience on that pretty much off the bat. 5 and 6 on backpacks is obviously great for down the rabbit hole, and then use Arcane Research to get Rite of Seeking. That is a Rite of Seeking level 2, I mean. So that is 6 experience for an idle upgrade in scenario 1 to sort out your accessory slot, upgrade your backpacks to find your soak. I don't mind that at all, and then from there you're really upgrading what you feel you need for your team. Read the Signs and Spectral Razor are definite last call, they are not important. Ward of Protection is kind of hard to justify upgrading again. It's dealing horror to you, Horror Soak is your Achilles heel, which is rare for a Mystic, but it is the case here. So using it on your teammates can be pretty sketchy. I'm not sure I would prioritize upgrading Ward at all in this deck. And really, we're in a situation where after Relic Hunter and Backpack, it's sort of like Deny 5 and Rite of Seeking are the most important cards in the deck. Because yes, we're built to recur events, but there is no upgraded Drain Essence. I'm not going crazy, right? I feel like there's no upgraded Drain Essence. No, there is no upgraded Drain Essence. Read the Signs and Spectral Razor just allow you to recur them slightly faster. Ward is team support, which I would love to give, but not with 4 horror. It's scary as hell to give your ward away when it puts you in range of auto-fail death to Rotting Remains. So I think my priority would actually be Deny 5s. I think once you get Deny 5s in the deck, you're basically completely safe. I think the deck's ridiculously strong at level 0 when you're already recurring the shit. There's an argument for Arcane Initiate being a priority upgrade. I don't know that Arcane Initiate's a priority upgrade either. It has more Horror Soak on it, but I don't know that I'm spending 3 experience for 1 Horror Soak ever in any deck. I think once you have Deny 5, you can prioritize upgrading Arcane Initiate, because if Deny 5 is in your hand, you can just play this guy with the 2 horror on it and you don't care about soak at all. But I think Deny 5 really is the most important upgrade in the deck, essentially meaning that you no longer have any expenditure limitation on bandages and Sparrow Mask and your ability. You're just going to be able to go non-stop, and recurring this, like the moment you heal horror with it once, right? Where instead of going from 4 to 3, you go from 4 to 5. Even on just like a 1 horror ship, you're basically safe now, right? It's so much harder to die with a 2 horror swing. That's the whole argument behind stuff like Soothing Melody being good enough, is that a 2 health swing is the difference from being on death's door to being safe to an auto-fail on Rotting Remains. I think genuinely, and it's so weird to recommend this in a 50 experience deck with this many experience permanents, Deny 5 is the priority. You want to get your consistency first. You need Relic Hunter to play your rosaries, you need backpacks, and you want to make sure you're using your permanents, your arcane researches, and your down the rabbit holes. But once you have the backpack to find the rosary, and the rosary is able to be in play with the heirloom, at that point it's kind of just deny and then whatever you're feeling. And something I'm having a hard time evaluating right now is I don't know which of the following statements is true. Switching back and forth between these decks, your numbers barely change from scenario 1 to scenario 8. but your numbers are 7 in head, and you're adding +2 from Rite of Seeking, or from Read the Signs, or from Spectral Razor, or just a straight 7 test on Drain, and a 5 in Foot. So like, your numbers don't really get much better over the course of a campaign. You basically just improve Rite of Seeking a little. And that can only mean one of two things. One, you scale poorly, or two, you start off fully scaled and it's absolutely crazy scenario 1. I am strongly leaning towards the latter. There are not a lot of scenario 1 characters testing Rite of Seeking at 7 head with one other asset in play. And certainly not an unlimited number of times. Like, Rite of Seeking is not unlimited, but the Sparrow Mask charges certainly are on Agnes. I think the scenario 1 Agnes deck for Parallel is insanely powerful. And I think the fact the priority upgrade path is one to become invincible, which is not Mythos immune, but very, very Mythos resilient. And again, to clarify that statement, Mythos immune does not mean the Mythos cannot kill you, it means the Mythos cannot do something bad when it happens during your turn. That no matter what the test is, you're going to be able to mitigate the effects or just pass the test. That's something very few characters truly achieve as Mythos immunity. It's basically just the realm of Wendy Adams and Big Money Rogues. Or this Agnes deck that just runs 4 copies of Ward Protection, basically. Coming over to the tier list, for a while, I've had Vanilla Agnes rated as my strongest character in B tier. And for those of you who don't really interact with my Discord very much, for some of these characters, I do like go out of my way to ask questions to my Discord and be like, hey, what am I missing? Because optimization is something where you will inevitably tunnel vision yourself. That's not even optimization, just card games. There are certain things where you write off a card, you're like, this is an edge case card, and then you look at it again down the line, you're like, this is a super edge case card, and eventually you're like, this card is so niche that I don't need to think about it. And there are cards like that for Parallel Agnes, where when I asked my Discord, hey, what am I missing on Agnes? Are there better ways to trigger Vanilla Agnes? Does anyone have any crazy cracked Parallel Agneses? Because in the past, I really couldn't justify running her over Vanilla. And that's where I got turned on to half Parallel Agnes and how crazy the front part is with the Vanilla back. It's also where people pointed out some of the stuff that I was missing with the recent cards that really push Parallel Agnes. Most importantly, Drain Essence and Sparrow Mask, whereas hadn't really thought about what Sparrow Mask means with an Agnes and how good Drain Essence is when you're able to recur it for a cost of health. So I think where I've had Agnes previously is too harsh on her. I think Parallel Agnes is definitely in A tier. That scenario 1 deck looks ridiculous. She's not immune to the Mythos, but the Mythos is certainly not going to slow her down specifically. It's going to be a team-wide effect, whatever happens. And that's true for almost every character in the game. Very few characters have the Mythos phase happen, and they're just like, doesn't matter, I'm going to pass the test. You'll notice that everyone above Rex Murphy is actually in that boat. Well connected, bestow resolve, use her ability with decent base stats, 4 in head plus higher education, or he can cancel his foot stats weakness by using, I forget the name of the skill card, but there's a skill card that should always be in his hand that's to make him pass the foot test. Daryl's Daryl, Gloria's Gloria, Amanda's Amanda. Amanda's Amanda is actually not an answer. Amanda will have Promise of Power in her hand with base 2s, which means she will always be testing at 6 of the Mythos. Everyone above Rex is genuinely Mythos immune. They have basically unlimited soak. They have good enough ways to beat the test that their unlimited soak is not going to matter, or they just have guaranteed ways to beat the test and they don't need to worry about it. As I talk about everyone above Rex being the people who are Mythos immune, just gonna continue not reining in my Parallel Father Mateo hype, because like, yeah, he's in that group. Once per turn, per scenario, he will get to pass a test, but it's not even a lump sum. Like if you spend a turn setting up, you can just bank the Bless token to next turn, use it then, and then put the new Bless on you. Parallel Father Mateo is absolutely insane. I'm done rating my hype in. The playtest will happen relatively soon, but like the dude's absolutely cracked. Who are we talking about? We're here for Agnes. It's a Parallel Mystic, I was close. The point I was making is that while Parallel Agnes is not going to die, I feel very confident in the durability of that deck, especially with Deny 5 as priority upgrade. That does not mean the Mythos won't do anything. There are a lot of Mythos cards that give you some random test for a very bad effect for your whole team. And Agnes is not guaranteed passing that. That said, she's better at it than almost anyone. So let's just bump her straight to Kate. Having 7-5 Mythos stats thanks to Sparrow Mask, and a deck running Backpack and as much scroll as I can cram in to get there quickly with unlimited charges on Sparrow Mask. Like, we just described why the entire top of my tier list are characters that are doing that. And she's not completely Mythos immune. Like, she will generally be slightly worse off than a late game Mark, but she starts off that way and Mark sure as hell doesn't. Gonna Am I just gonna drop Mark ranks? Is this what's happening? Every time we talk about a top-end Mystic, we just drop Mark a little bit? I'm having a really hard time arguing he's better than Father Mateo or Tony. Part of the whole reason I wanted to do this series is because I wanted to like push myself to think as hard as I could about each character, and I normally do that to some degree, but not to this degree. I'm talking about like in the preparation for making a tier list, and I think having the entire tier list prep thing done like much more thoroughly in front of everyone where people can tell me why I'm wrong, and I can check myself and maintain or increase hype, I think that's fun. I think I enjoy that. I hope you're enjoying the process too. But I genuinely think that Father Mateo's ability to guarantee pass a test from scenario 1 just directly outclasses Mark. I don't think it's close. And I think Tony Morgan also needs to build up a well-connected. So what I'm really doing here is that's what's happening. Cannot talk about the right parallel Mystic today, can I? Kate's passing any scenario test, not just the Mythos test. So they're both similarly Mythos immune. I would actually say that Agnes is more so because she is, I can't even say she's less likely to die. Kate's not dying, not Clue Dropper Kate, that's just not happening. So they're both veritably Mythos immune. Lily Chin steamrolls her role in a way that a Kate really doesn't. She's not Mythos immune, but she's very, very Mythos resilient. And she is better at fighting than Clue Dropper Kate is at cluing by a very large margin. Her team support is worse, but not zero. It's also experience cost. Kate takes a while to get off the ground, and I think that puts Agnes above her. I think, God, Wendy is hard. All three of these characters feel like they're making compelling arguments to be an S tier, but I think Lily's making the least compelling argument of the lot. I think Wendy and Agnes just straight up not giving a shit about the Mythos phase is fairly massive. Just real quick, I think I'm being too harsh on Parallel Zoe. I think she's better than Akachi and Ursula. I think the following statement is generally true on my tier list. The top two except for S+, the top two and top bottom characters in every tier are on the threshold of being in the previous or next tier. Lola, less so Amina, really is making a case that maybe they should be in F tier. Roland, even Parallel Jim, and Jenny are making a case they should be in C. Hank and Tommy are making a case they don't deserve to be in C. Alessandra and Carolyn are making great cases they shouldn't be in B, or if they aren't, then there are similar cases that Stella and Preston shouldn't be in B. Diana and Monterey feel very close to being A tier, Ursula and Akachi feel very close to not being A tier, and Agnes and Wendy feel very close to being S tier. As I've said before, everyone's ranked plus or minus 5. No one's exact position is locked in, and while usually I'm confident in the tier, the edges of those tiers are not something where I'm rock solid on them at all. I think I'm happy with Parallel Agnes and Wendy being where they are. Eventually I'm gonna replay Wendy and see if people are right and that I'm gaslighting myself into thinking she's slower than she is. I think Parallel Agnes isn't like proactively monstrous in the way that a lot of the S tier characters are. She's stupidly resilient to the point that I'm unafraid to enter scenarios with, 6'4" soak on a character that is not Charlie Kane. But proactively, while she's still very good at taking tests, she's not taking tests with unusually high impacts, and she's not taking tests with unusually high levels of reliability. Like, yes, they're very high levels of reliability, but A tier characters are fucking crazy. All of the A tier characters have crazy levels of reliability. Maybe not as high as Agnes, that's why she's at the top. I think Wendy is much closer to being an S than Parallel Agnes is. And I think Vanilla Agnes probably deserves to be an A tier at least as much as Akachi and Ursula did. Do I want to move Akachi down? She feels so similar to Monterey Jack, like very different ways of accomplishing it, but similar game plans. Akachi's immobile with incredibly high throughput. Monterey Jack's so mobile that it makes his throughput higher by basically removing the need for tons of draw, resource, and move actions thanks to his ability. They're both super independent flex characters, very reliant on drawing specific cards that matter tremendously to them. I think Akachi and Monterey Jack should be side by side in the same tier, and I'm more comfortable with that tier being B than A. Coming back to the deck list to wrap up on Half Parallel Agnes, she's a really interesting and powerful character. No other Mystic is built like her, no other Mystic is going to play like her. It's a very interesting puzzle to solve, and unlike some of the weaker puzzles in the game, I feel like the actual reward of the puzzle is super engaging, very different from other characters, and strong enough to have been worth the solving of the puzzle. I think recurring these Mystic events and then finding ways to accelerate your draw with Heirloom of Hyperborea and Arcane Initiate is very powerful. I think having a deck that can justify running Backpack because of how strong Sparrow Mask and this draw is really, really cool. I think the whole deck just fits together very neatly. And unlike a lot of decks where I'm like, this deck is streamlined and really good because of it, and the deck's boring as sin, this deck is streamlined in the process of streamlining a deck where you don't need to run economy and you have an incentive to run backpack as your draw to find like all of your items that you care about are items. It ends up being a much more interesting thing, because a lot of the time, the process of streamlining a deck is you run Faustian Bargain and Easy Mark, and that's your whole economy, but then you need to fit in more draw to find the economy, or more economy, so you fit in the draw. And it often results in like the same 10 power cards for whatever class combination we're talking about, eating up the economy and draw slots. But because Parallel Agnes has built-in economy and incredibly important assets that lets her prioritize a backpack in a way few other characters can, it results in a deck where, yes, it's streamlined, but almost none of its deck slots are taken up by economy. I'm only running eCash, and this is the economy card specifically because you can find it with backpack, and you do need some economy. Rite of Seeking costs 5, you can't pay for spell assets with your ability, and the rest of your stuff's relatively cheap, except for Heirloom and Hyperborea, that one's gonna cost you. So yeah, I like everything about the deck. Whereas with Vanilla Agnes, I feel like the puzzle is how do you solve your ability? How do you get good value out of activating this reaction? And the answer is that the triggers just haven't aged well. That it's still good, it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, it still steamrolls campaigns, but compared to the other things you can be doing, it's hardly impressive. With Parallel Agnes, because of the economy part, which I feel goes understated in conversations about her pretty tremendously, the fact that Parallel Agnes basically gets to ignore economy, like that's the entire reason Amina Zidane's not garbage and getting to sit in F tier, is that having a strong economy card as your ability is insane. There are other characters that make similar promises and fail. Jenny Barnes and Tommy are great examples of characters that do have more economy, but not enough more to warp deck building, not enough more to be really tremendously more powerful. Parallel Agnes has not quite Amina Zidane's ability, but something on par with Amina Zidane's ability, and that lets her build so much cooler decks. Importantly, not just cooler, more powerful. And I really, really like this deck. Just how much I like her has me worried the ranking is hype and not wholly representative of reality. It's something I'm going to be playtesting like as soon as I'm not locked into a Bless build with my table, because I really want to play half Parallel Agnes now. Of all the characters I've done videos on, this is probably one that has me the most hyped, not just because it's obviously strong, but because it's strong in a unique and cool way. Anyway, let's wrap this up. I've been Rather Incoherent, thank you for your time. If you could hit all the buttons to make the algorithm happy, I'd greatly appreciate it, but notably, I'm going to ask, I'd like to hear if you think I'm underestimating Vanilla Agnes and why, and also if you think I'm overestimating Parallel Agnes. Do you think I'm just like underselling the insanity beneath her? Because like, yeah, these are some pretty damn strong characters. Or do you think there's a weakness to the character that I'm just overlooking during the hype deck building stage? And before I go, a massive thank you to the people supporting this channel, both on Patreon as patrons and on YouTube as channel members. I'll see all of you in the next one.